Greetings, and welcome to my channel. This is Sorcerer Tal. You can also find me on Facebook in the Sorcerer's Guild. Today, on Becoming Weird, we are going to be getting more in-depth onto the concept of Wanga and how it affects our spellcraft. Now, in order to do that, of course, we're going to need to more fully understand the concept behind the word Wanga. So I'm going to break today's discussion down into 3 parts. In the first part, I will more clearly define the word Wanga and give an example of how it works within our current understanding of some other words that we use. And then I will explain what part of the spellcraft Wanga is and how it affects the way that our spellcraft manifests. And then we will also talk a little bit about how Wanga matters when one is in conflict situations and how we can use the concept of Wanga to prevent harm to ourselves in emergency situations. We'll be getting more into that in a sorcery self-defense episode, but we'll talk a little bit about it here. And then I will wrap that all up at the end there and try to put it all together into a cohesive narrative so that we can better understand this concept and get onto the more practical applications of that will be coming up on the Becoming Weird playlist. Okay, so I'm sure you've noticed I don't have the microphone today. I don't know. The one I bought apparently wasn't a very good one. I couldn't get it to work tonight. Sorry about that. So hopefully you can hear me well enough. I will try to enunciate as clearly as I can. Okay, so anyways, Wanga. Wanga, as I said, is the chaotic reaction to what already exists. It is the unpredictable energy that spirals as the reaction to what is already there. Yeah? But that being said, Wanga actually, in a way, comes before Ufu. Ufu being the repeated established patterns that move within any interaction, within any pattern. We have the established repeated patterns that are going, that is the Ufu, and then when two of those patterns collide and create sparks or friction, the unexpected things that are outside of the expected, that would be the Wanga. In chaos magic, or in chaos theory, we have this idea of the strange attractor. And the strange attractor is when a pattern has begun to form within the chaos. And it can also often we think of this as taking on a figure 8. But it's when the fractals have begun so much repetition that we begin to see a pattern develop within the fractals, and that pattern is going in its little figure 8s over and over again until something changes, until something else causes that pattern to conflict within itself. And then when these two patterns come up against each other, we have a conflict that arises, and the pattern goes wild. And as it's going wild, that is the Wanga part of chaos. Yeah, that is the part that is just flinging around randomly until it begins interacting with each other and a new pattern is established and Ufu begins to take hold. But when it first starts, with those first bits, that is Wanga as well. We could even think of this as earthquakes. I don't want to confuse things, but this is something that is another way to understand it on the material plane. We have 2 tectonic plates that are grinding against each other, and that slow grind every day as the 2 plates move, well, that's Ufu, because they're just moving along and there's nothing really going on. They're just slowly plodding against each other. But then you have that sudden break when you have an earthquake and they shake, and that shaking motion. That is the Wanga escaping from the interaction of the two opposing patterns. Yeah? Okay, so hopefully that has made it clear exactly what I mean when I'm talking about Wanga. Now, there's a reason that I talked specifically about how Wanga, although it is a reaction to Ufu, comes before Ufu until the new pattern is established. Because that is where Wanga has to do with our spellcraft. In fact, with the beings that are working with teaching me how to understand this, they actually call the spellcraft Wanga. The divination involved is Ufu. Anyways, we will be talking more about them later. We will be a little later on in this series, and I will name them then. We're not going to get to that now. So, anyways, the Wanga is the introduction of new variables that can change the momentum of a situation. So anytime that we are doing any magic, especially that is on the intent, form, charge, release model, where we're creating energy and putting it into the system, that energy that we've created and pushed out, that is Wanga, and it pushes into the new pattern and adds new variables, which then affect the pattern and weave it into a new set. Yeah? And of course, when we introduce Wanga into a situation, Wanga has an exponential effect. So this is another aspect that we need to be taken into consideration when we cast a spell, is that not the energy that we put in is going to affect things and cause other patterns to move, which are then going to grade against other patterns and cause more Wanga. And Wanga isn't necessarily a bad thing. Wanga is change. Wanga is how we alter what is. And we want to consider what momentums we are working with. I have a video about that already on positioning and momentum, and I talk a lot about that in there. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about it here as well. We have patterns that we can observe, and the less we have to move the pattern, the less it's going to cause other conflicts, and the less energy we have to put into it, the more efficient things are. So if we notice that a person, like say for example, we are doing a spell where we want to help a person at work, and we notice that there is a certain aspect of their job that they are already doing very well, it would be easier to introduce a Wanga variable, a new variable, into the situation, introduce Wanga into it that draws attention to this pattern that's already going on of this part of the job that they already do really well, rather than trying to push in new energy, Wanga, into the situation that would that would cause them to be better at something else within the job that they weren't already good at. Now, that might be the better way to go if there are skills that they need in order to advance, but if it's more they already have the skills and you can draw attention to that one skill, then you may want to focus the spellcraft more directly on that. So that's where this part of the weaving comes in. The Wanga is the new variables introduced, and the more strong you have the pattern locked into this new variable, the more soon it's going to become a repeated pattern, part of the momentum, and part of the Ufu, or general momentum, of the situation, and manifest more directly. Yeah? Okay, so now we will get to this last part about how Wanga is involved in any conflict. Well, really, both Ufu and Wanga are involved. But we can use this concept of Wanga to help us understand what might happen when the unexpected occurs. Because, well, that's what Wanga is. and we need to learn to understand the patterns and observe tendencies within a situation. And the most important of these, of course, the patterns and tendencies, that's the ufu, or within it. But the most important of these, and the one we can control the most, is understanding our own Wanga and how we react to the unexpected, and training ourselves to have a more reasoned reaction to Wanga. In the sorcery self-defense video that I'm going to be talking about, that I'm going to be bringing up with this concept of Wanga, we will be talking about how to use this idea of the unexpected to help us enter into that calm state, that zone or slow motion feel that some of us get when we are in an emergency situation. Some of us get there already naturally, but with understanding the concept of Wanga, we can learn to focus on the unexpected and how that is going to react, the chain reactions involved. Yeah, that's a good way to put this. When we are thinking about conflict, we are actually now looking at, well, Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So, that helps us predict not only how other people might react in maybe a situation where you're having a conflict with someone, and how you would want to deal with that person, and the ways that you can tell the patterns of how they move from their movements, if that made any sense. But anyways, we're not going to get too in-depth into that here. I just want to get the general broad strokes of the concept, and then we'll cover it more in the sorcery self-defense episode involving this. Anyways, so with the Wanga of the situation is defined by the ufu that came before. And you can tell someone's ufu by how they move, their mannerisms, things like that, that will give you a general example, because Wanga isn't completely unpredictable. It is when patterns are broken. And when patterns are broken, there are still pieces of those patterns that will respond. And when we understand this interaction between the two, it allows us to predict with more accuracy what is most likely about to occur. Yeah? And that brings me up to why it's important to understand this difference between ufu and Wanga. We'll be talking more about ufu in the next episode, but ufu being the repeated patterns and tendencies. Ufu is what we go to for divination, while Wanga is what we use to affect how the patterns will come out. Yeah? So ufu is for reading the patterns, and Wanga is for directing the patterns and affecting the momentum. Okay, so let's see if I can piece this all together into more cohesive narrative. So we have Wanga, which, as I just said, is the thing that is used to direct patterns and affect how things are woven. Wanga, although it creates ufu, as it is repeated, is the product of ufu when two patterns conflict and create an unexpected moment. This is exactly why we are always talking about ufu and Wanga anytime we have a crossroads, because we are talking about in-between spaces, a place where two or more things combine and connect. So we have this interaction that occurs. Anytime there is an interaction of any type, there is ufu and Wanga in that moment. Yeah? And these are the things that we are dealing with when we open the crossroads and begin affecting reality from that standpoint. Okay. So, hopefully that cleared this up a little more. and didn't just confuse the concept. If there's any questions you have for me, feel free to ask about that in the comments. That's going to be it for this episode. Thank you once again for joining us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please take the opportunity to do so now. Until next time, bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tal.